Please welcome Commissioner Solomon.
Well, thank you. You really covered a lot of territory. In fact, most of my notes that I have here today, but maybe we can get into some deeper conversation. You know, it's certainly a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to our talk here today. And I have read the report and found that, you know, it highlights a number of issues that we rarely discuss here in New Jersey, and frankly, energy regulators and planners in those 23 other states that you mentioned ever take the time to discuss. You know, think about when you've heard at either a hearing or if you attend the BPU meeting, you know, how often you hear any of the items Mark mentioned discussed. You know, I myself gave voice to some of these issues when I was a commissioner, and it's been suggested that maybe that's one of the reasons I'm not there anymore today. But
that's why I'm not a commissioner.
That's what happens. But let's start with the big picture, okay? You noted in your report the stated goal for New Jersey and the EMP, Energy Master Plan, along with those 23 other states that have the same report written by the same Rocky Mountain Institute. I think they just put it out to each state, the same one, or so it seems to me, is to achieve 100% clean energy by 2035, wherein clean is defined as carbon-free. Okay, explain to me how achieving the goal of being carbon-free can be differentiated from some past goals of, let's say, removing pollutants from the energy sector. You know, that's something that we're all familiar with SOx and NOx, and why this goal is different from the one that you know, was previously instituted upon the energy industry.
And Dianne, thank you for joining me, by the way. That's, it's much more fun to have a collegial conversation with a commissioner, former commissioner, than when I was testifying before commissions, because I was considered a hostile witness, as you might imagine, especially when they were, you know, adjudicated proceedings. That was
sure.
It was a fascinating experience, I must say. I have great respect for the process. It gets corrupted because a lot of things, just behavior, but I don't know what the alternative is. So you really just have to work at the political system, and the public have to push back on what they expect from the commission, and I think we'll see changes. I think we're going to see changes. But to answer your question, the fundamental difference is that, as you put it, and you know, the language is criteria pollutant. Pollutants that affect you, where you live immediately, you know, photochemical smog, dirty water, you know, polluting the water from a power plant. This has a local impact, and it has some transport impact, hence the debates over acid rain, but it's not the planet. So this is the only time, I think it's fair to say, that any time in the history of the utility industry that we've tried to regulate something that's only relevant to the globe. So it's a globe, because carbon dioxide is emitted everywhere. So that is really different, and that's why it requires an awareness of what's going on in the globe, self-evidently. So setting aside why CO2 is different than nitrogen oxide, it's profoundly different, because nitrogen oxide is not, you do not want to be breathing it. CO2, you breathe it all the time, you exhale it, it's a quote harmless gas biologically. So that's the essence of the difference, which really distorts sort of the local role. And so you're doing global offsets for future theoretical, and I don't say this by being insulting to the climate modelers. The models are theoretical. You're modeling a future impact, not a present impact, but a future impact. We'll call it sea level rise. We expect sea level to rise in New Jersey, if you believe the models, if all these things happen, but it's a future, and it's a model, and it's global versus present, it's measurable, and it's knowable. Really slippery slope stuff.
Right, and you know, you spend a lot of time in the report reviewing the 7 goals of the New Jersey Energy Master Plan, and you really debunk them, frankly, for quite an extent. And you know, we have the agency taking on the responsibility of doing evaluation, measurement, and verification. You know, it's a big item at the board to be able to, you know, measure and verify. You know, let's say that we were able to measure and achieve, you know, what would, I think you've talked about this a little bit, but even more so, you know, the global impact be, and is it really doable?
So, again, I like, as you know, the obsession with measure and verify for the commission is exactly what they should be doing. And because otherwise, in public service, you're just guessing, and you're playing with people's money and their lives. So, and commissioners know this. They know the consequence of blackouts. It's like, and I don't think any commissioner, even those who I disagree with, disagrees with their fundamental objective. You know, keep the lights on, keep people safe, minimize costs, and they have all the other goals. But here's the problem. The stated goal, let's use cars and the demand that the stated, or solar panels. We'll go to solar panels, an easy one. The stated goal is we're going to cut CO2 emissions, and the assumption is that the CO2 emissions that are not emitted by the, we'll call it in New Jersey, the gas turbine, go away when the solar panels is put there. Okay, they do go away locally, but again, we're a global issue. So it's just a fact point. I did this, I'll confess, back of the envelope. I am going to do it more rigorously. But an average size home in New Jersey, if it puts solar panels on its roof with incentives, that will have caused 100 tons of coal to be burned in China to make the polysilicon for that one house. Of coal, not coal theoretically, but of actual coal in China. So that's a fact. Now, could I trace that? That one, the commission could actually demand to know the source of the solar modules, where the polysilicon came from. These are pretty straightforward supply chains, where they was fabricated, and on what grid, and use that number with some degree of narrow-banded accuracy, and they would know the CO2 emissions from that solar panel on that roof and what they're offsetting. Now, in that case, there would be a reduction. It'll be less than the gas plant, but the reduction might not be as much as you think. You could do the same for cars. Now, cars are impossible because the soup of chemicals is so huge. Polysilicon and coal linked, they're basically cousins. But batteries have dozens of chemicals and metals that go through hundreds of corporates, private and public, and mostly into China, and you are never going to know the data from China. So you won't know.
Well, you know, in talking about those, you know, the transitionists, so to speak, you know, I know that you seem critical of state and federal policy that leads to the complete retirement of most of the existing energy infrastructure without economic or social consequences, which you mentioned before. Through this lens, what are the most impactful consequences, good and bad, of the EMP? One of the, you know, mantra remarks while I was at the BPU, and one of our past president, Joe Fiordaliso, would say at every meeting, you know, it's for the children. You know, and every time I sort of sat there and said, okay, how? You know, really? So, you know, both good and bad for this report. How are the children doing?
Well, the children in sub-Saharan Africa, not so good, because New Jersey implements, with other 20 states, plans for grid-scale batteries. The demand for mining and the acceleration and the magnitude of money, we were talking here, hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into those economies will incentivize more abuses of children in those countries. So if we care about the children, now we care about New Jersey children, it has no effect on their environment. It'll have a negative effect on their life if they live in low-income households, because their parents will be poor, so they won't be able to afford whatever it is they would like to do. Or they won't have, on the margin, the first thing that goes are vacations, because that's what lower-income families get rid of when their electric bills double or triple. And I know, you know, I was trying to be very careful. As you know, I didn't write this to be critical of New Jersey or the governor or either party. I'm just trying to lay out the facts. But if I'm asked qualitatively, you know, do children benefit? Well, what's good about it? There's nothing good about it. Everything about it's bad. everything. There's nothing that's being done that will result in a material benefit to the planet because of all kinds, not just the data I showed you, which means that there's no benefit for anybody, not just children. The only people who will benefit were those that are in the supply chain to build the things that are being subsidized. And the children of those families will benefit.
Speaking of those that are being subsidized, let's go to wind and well, let's start with EVs first because you were just speaking about them. And I don't think you mentioned the case study in Norway. And I thought that was very interesting, and maybe you want to share that.
Well, it was interesting. So Norway now has, last year, 60% of all net new cars purchased were EVs. 60%. 20% of all the cars on the road in Norway are EVs. Here we're about 1.1%. So they've got huge EV penetration. It's a country that has a population roughly of Manhattan. So, it's a lot of people, but it's not the state of New Jersey. But what's happened over that time period is that the absolute consumption of oil by the transportation sector overall is largely unchanged. It's tilted down a bit, a skosh, a few percentage points. And you look at that and scratch your head and say, well, what's going on? Well, Norwegians are rich, is the answer. Norwegians are far richer than the U.S. on average. They're richer than everybody in New Jersey on average.
Well, I just retired. Maybe I should move on it.
Well, in Europe, they're the richest country. They're 50% wealthier per capita than Americans from exporting oil and gas, by the way. That's where the wealth comes from. And their Teslas, which they preferentially buy, are charged on a hydropower grid. They're blessed to be on a hydropowered area. The curse is they have to live, in a northern latitude like I grew up in. So what's really going on? It's a long way of saying they're purchased by wealthy people in multi-car households. They're used to drive to the country club or go shopping or to have a good time, but they have 2 or 3 cars, so they're not used a lot. The data show electric cars on average are driven half as many miles as the average vehicle, and then also owned by multi-car wealthy households. So you shouldn't be shocked to learn if the wealthy people use an expensive car episodically, it doesn't change oil use very much. That's why the governments want to mandate only electric, so that it's not just wealthy people, but middle class and poor people have no choice but to avoid oil use. That's the whole point.
Right.
But it's not working in Norway because they're okay but when I was there, I did tell them, when you bought your Tesla, you already emitted 45 tons of CO2, which is more than your diesel car will emit for the next decade.
Yeah, it's, in the statistics, we're following it also at the board once they started making those incentives, found exactly the same phenomena happening in New Jersey.
Yeah.
It's really no different here. And so that would then take us to wind.
Yeah.
And as you know, over the past 6 months, wind and energy projects were canceled both in New Jersey, New York. Yet we just, I think the other day, put out an additional solicitation for more wind energy. Is New Jersey chasing a pipe dream? Do you think this is really something that we're going to be able to, pull off? I mean, from being at the BPU, the last solicitation was more expensive than the prior solicitation.
Right.
The cost, there have been additional costs to bring that energy to shore in some of the projects that we're using for that. We came up with a program with PJM to basically take on the entire cost of bringing that energy onshore rather than what we normally do, share it among all the states that will benefit from that energy. So we've taken on a lot here in New Jersey.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, set aside the carbon dioxide issue, I would just stipulate that the Commission should ask for the same transparency on the upstream CO2 emissions in the supply chain to make the wind turbines, to determine actual CO2 net offsets to the planet, since again, it's a planetary goal, and they're not doing that. So they're taking all the credit for, they're pretending the CO2 emissions to make the steel, to make the aluminum, to make the neodymium don't exist. Obviously, it's not true, so for data accuracy, they should do that. The thing about wind turbines is interesting, offshore wind turbines in particular. I think I could say without exception, the single most expensive way that you could make electricity with machines we know how to build is an offshore wind turbine. The only thing that's more expensive is a delayed nuclear plant. A nuclear plant but a non-delayed nuclear plant. That's,
Vogel?
yeah, Vogel. That's why I'm being unkind to my Georgia Power friends. And setting aside all the reasons, the challenges they had. But if Vogel would come in on budget, and they do come on budget all over the world, but if Vogel would come in on budget, it would then, my statement stands. And the trajectory for offshore wind turbine costs are going up, not down. First, they're capital intensive, so cost of capital. All the input materials, so a wind turbine, about 30% of the cost of a wind turbine is the purchase of its primary materials. The steel, the aluminum, the neodymium, the plastic blades. They're resins, but they're plastics. And those costs are all rising. Some of them are rising astonishingly.
Steel.
And so what's happened is the wind turbine manufacturers have said they won't deliver fixed price turbines. They have a commodity price rider. So a lot of those orders are evaporating because the counterparty, the utility, doesn't want to take the commodity risk. Wise. The other thing, your point on the offshore, bring the power offshore to land. So there are only, I think, 3 companies in the world, it may be 2, but I think it's 3, that know how to manufacture deep sea power cables. So what will happen is everybody rushes to get more of them. No shock, there'll be a shortage of cables. Prices will escalate, not by a little, but 2 or 3x, big escalations. That market may or may not respond. So the question is, the progressive plan, and I say that without invective, I'm just saying the progressive plan is that will stimulate the conservatives' view of a market response. They'll make more cables. Yes, they will eventually, but the question you want to know, again, if you're a commissioner, is, okay, well, is anybody building more cable capacity globally? Because we don't make them in New Jersey. And you look around, you say, no, they're not expanding, 20% expansion. Nobody's building a net new multi-billion-dollar offshore wind turbine cable plant. Why? Maybe that board is suspicious that if they spend $2 billion to expand capacity, that the residents of states like New Jersey will object to their electric rates tripling, and that they'll never get the order. So they're going to sit on the, so I think behind doors in boardrooms, the capital investment is sitting on the sidelines. This is true in mining, by the way. There's going to be a shortage of copper within a few years. Markets will respond eventually, but not for years. They're not responding now.